The most important thing that happened today was not what Washington said. It was not even what Tehran said. It was what China did not say. Iran refused to send negotiators to Pakistan for the second round of talks. The ceasefire expires on Wednesday. The Americans flew to Islamabad anyway. And China, the one outside power whose oil purchases give Iran the economic oxygen, to refuse. The one outside power whose connection to the seized cargo ship everyone understands, said nothing. That silence matters more than most public speeches. In fact, I think China's silence is doing more work in this negotiation than almost anything Washington or Tehran has said out loud. To understand why, start with the way the story is being framed. Most coverage is treating Iran's refusal as a simple act of stubbornness. Iran is being difficult. Iran is playing games. Iran is using the ceasefire clock as leverage. If Iran would just get on a plane, then maybe a deal could happen. That framing is shallow. Iran's refusal is not a tantrum. It is a strategic calculation. And the calculation rests on one word: trust. That is the real problem. Round one in Islamabad lasted 21 hours. It was the highest level direct U.S.-Iran meeting since 1979. And the most important line that came out of it was not about centrifuges or sanctions or timetables. It was that Iran no longer trusts the other side. That is not a technical issue. That is not a scheduling issue. That is the whole issue. America signed one nuclear agreement and tore it up. America publicly spoke about progress and then shifted the terms. Trump publicly implied Iran had basically agreed. Iran publicly said that was false. An American source said the two sides were about 80% of the way there. Then the last 20% suddenly became the real deal. Then inside the same broader diplomatic window, America seized an Iranian cargo ship that had originated in China. If you are Tehran, what does that look like? It does not look like sincerity. It looks like a negotiation in which the military pressure never actually leaves the room. So when Iran says it will not travel, I do not read that first as drama. I read it as a state acting on evidence. If you got close to the biggest deal in half a century, and then the terms shifted, and then your ship was seized anyway, I may rush into another round simply because Washington wants one. That is why I think the trust deficit matters more than the headlines admit. And there is another layer. The Iran in this story is not one Iran, it is two. There is the Iran of Arakchi, the diplomatic Iran, the Iran that still wants some version of a deal because it knows the next phase of the war could be even harder to survive. Then there is the Iran of the IRGC. The hardline Iran, the Iran that saw the ship's seizure and heard only one message. America still thinks coercion works better than credibility. These two Irans are not reading the same incentives in the same way. You can hear that in the contradictory statements. One official says no travel. Another says maybe today or tomorrow. That is not noise. That is an internal argument being fought in public, and China knows that argument is happening. That is why China's silence matters so much. Beijing has been the most important outside actor in this war, but not in the theatrical way people imagine. China has not entered the war with fleets or declarations. It has entered the war through quiet structure first. China has kept Iran economically alive. That is the base layer. Iran was supposed to be isolated. Iran was supposed to be squeezed until pain became surrender. That never fully happened because the oxygen system kept working. Shadow tankers, spoofed transponders, ship transfers, relabeled cargoes, non-dollar settlement. Chinese refiners willing to keep buying. That system does not make Iran safe. It makes Iran unbroken. That distinction matters. Second, China has kept Iran diplomatically protected. Washington wanted enforcement mechanisms. China and Russia blocked them. Washington wanted a cleaner form of international isolation. China never allowed that to exist. And then there is the broader intelligence environment. The reports that Chinese linked commercial imagery help improve Iranian targeting against American positions. Whether one believes every detail or not, the meaning is obvious. China is not standing outside the war. China is part of the war's strategic environment. Third, and most important for today, China pressed Iran to open Hormuz last week. That matters enormously. Wang Yi called Arakchi. Iran opened Hormuz on Friday. Trump thanked everyone in capital letters. Oil fell. The market relaxed. Then America kept the blockade logic alive. Iran tightened the strait again. America seized the ship. And China said nothing. That sequence is the key. China asked for movement. Iran gave movement. America did not turn that opening into trust. It turned it into another display of coercion. After that, China chose silence. That is not passive. That is calculated. In international politics, silence is never empty. Silence is a signal. The real question is, who is reading it, and what does it tell them? Iran is reading China's silence very carefully, and what Iran sees is this: our most important external partner is still buying our oil, still preserving our oxygen, still protecting U.S. diplomatically, still refusing to publicly push us back into negotiations even after the Americans seized a ship linked to China itself that looks like permission, not explicit permission, structural permission. The kind of permission that comes when your partner has decided your refusal is acceptable or at least less costly than forcing you into another round that may fail exactly the way the last one did. Beijing's choices were not complicated. If China publicly protests the seizure, it turns the incident into a direct U.S.-China confrontation before a summit. Both sides still want. If China publicly pressures Iran back to the table, it assumes ownership of the next round. If Iran walks away again, or if America shifts the terms again, China becomes responsible for a process it cannot fully control. Beijing does not want responsibility. It wants leverage, it wants credit if a deal eventually appears. It does not want blame if one fails. So it says nothing. And Iran reads that silence the way any serious state would. Our refusal is tolerable. This is why I think China's nothing is doing more work than most public speeches. It tells Tehran that Beijing currently prefers ambiguity to a rushed agreement on Washington's terms. Why would China prefer that? Because a clean deal reduces Chinese leverage. If Iran gets a broad agreement, sanctions ease, market access widens, and dependence on Chinese channels falls, America gets to say its tools still work. The war winds down in a way that restores American credibility more than Chinese influence. That is not Beijing. Ideal outcome, Beijing. Better outcome is a long, expensive, unresolved war that weakens America, preserves Iran's dependence, keeps China indispensable, and lets Beijing posture as a stabilizer without sacrificing its relationship with Tehran. That is why the current state of the war may actually suit China better than a clean agreement does. Extended, unresolved, costly for Washington, survivable for Tehran, strategically useful for Beijing. And hanging over all of this is the Trump-Xi summit. Every Chinese move is now being weighed against whether it makes that summit easier or harder. A loud public protest over the ship raises the stakes before the summit, pressuring Iran too hard, reduces Beijing's leverage over both sides, silence avoids both costs. That is not passivity, that is prioritization. Now, to be fair, America's case is not imaginary. The pressure is real, the blockade is real, Iran's currency is under severe strain. Iran did come remarkably close to a deal in Islamabad. Washington can plausibly say, we showed up, they refused, the world can see who is serious that matters. But the American position still cannot solve one problem. Every round of pressure seems to bring Iran to the same place, close enough to a deal to prove the pain matters, but not broken enough to accept the terms Washington wants. That is the real difficulty. America is trying to force a decisive diplomatic result against a country that still has oxygen, and as long as China keeps that oxygen flowing, pain can intensify without becoming decisive. That is why I think the next 48 hours matter so much. There are 3 signals to watch. First, whether China says anything specific about the seized ship, not generic language about peace or stability. Something specific. If China stays silent, that tells you ambiguity still serves Beijing better than confrontation. Second, whether Wang Yi calls Arakchi again before Wednesday. If he does, Beijing may have decided that a deal now serves it better than continued limbo. If he does not, Beijing likely still prefers the current unresolved structure. Third, what Iran actually does, not what one spokesman says. If a delegation still arrives, diplomatic Iran won the argument for now. If nobody comes, hardline Iran won. And if the hardliners win while China stays silent, then you have your answer. China's silence was not empty. It was the loudest signal in the negotiation. Not because Beijing spoke, because it chose not to. And in a war like this, that choice is never neutral.